Everyone expected the champions to win again. Their expensive rifles, branded suits, and reputation left no doubt. But when a woman in old boots and flannels stepped up to the line, no one even paid attention. They laughed when she picked up a gun. But after one shot, the silence became so loud that surprise filled the entire room. What happened to her shot, and how did she make the champions burn with shame? Enjoy the story. In a small town tucked away on the outskirts of an annual shooting competition, the morning dawned with a peculiar blend of rustic charm and electric anticipation. Narrow cobblestone streets wound their way past modest storefronts and warmly lit cafes, while the townspeople bustled about as if preparing for a grand parade. This was not the kind of place where one would expect high-octane sporting rivalries. Here, tradition and community intermingled with muted pride and quiet determination. The local shooting range, a sprawling field bordered by old oak trees and faded billboards, promising world-class marksmanship, had been the centerpiece of the town for generations. It was a venue where the finest shooters, those armed with state-of-the-art equipment and polished reputations, came to display their expertise before crowds of discerning fans and media representatives. On this particular day, the main attraction was not only the promise of fierce competition, but also the palpable atmosphere of expectation that hung in the humid summer air. Prestigious champions, their glistening rifles and custom shooting gear glimmering in the light, mingled with an enthusiastic crowd of local residents and visiting spectators. Every detail spoke of excellence: the immaculate setup of competition lanes, the crisp sound of rifle cocking, and the ceremonial hum of pre-competition rituals that had been perfected over countless editions of the contest. The air was filled with murmurs of admiration for those champions who had set records and captured hearts across the country. Yet, as the clock neared the official start of the competition, an unexpected sight stirred a ripple of disbelief through the gathering. Through the gateway of the modestly adorned competition hall, where the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of gunpowder, a solitary figure walked calmly toward the firing line. She was an unassuming woman in her mid-40s, draped in a well-worn flannel suit that bore the faint stains and creases of many hard-fought days. Her boots were sturdy but plain, and there was nothing extravagantly modern or high-end about the simple rifle she carried under one arm. Unlike the glitzy champions clad in sleek, custom-fitted gear, she exuded a sense of unfashionable practicality, as though she had stepped straight out of a bygone era where hard work and perseverance were virtues, rather than the polished image embraced by competitive elites. Almost immediately, her appearance sparked whispers and derisive laughter among the regular competitors and spectators alike. In the refined circle of seasoned marksmen, where every detail of appearance and equipment was scrutinized as a symbol of status and expertise, her humble attire and unembellished gear marked her as an outsider, an anomaly in a world dominated by expensive accessories and ostentatious pride. Some competitors exchanged amused glances, and a few of the more pretentious spectators scoffed openly, remarking in low voices that perhaps she was just there for company, to watch the show rather than to compete. Yet, beneath her simple exterior lay a quiet, unyielding determination. She moved with deliberate purpose, her steps measured and controlled, as if each stride carried not only her own resolve, but the hopes of countless underdogs who had ever been dismissed at first glance. There was an air of mystery around her, a subtle aura that defied the shallow assumptions of those around her. Whenever she passed, a few onlookers wondered if her calm face perhaps concealed a lifetime of hidden struggles and unspoken victories, a story far more compelling than the polished narratives of the usual champions. The local organizers looked on, barely concealing their skepticism. They had arranged every detail meticulously to celebrate excellence in marksmanship. And here was a newcomer whose very presence threatened to upend the expected order. Commentaries began to ripple among the veteran shooters. Some claimed that someone like her would never last a round on such a prestigious stage, while others muttered that her participation was nothing more than a quaint anomaly, a curious outlier destined to be forgotten once the competition was underway. As the time for the first round approached, the tension in the crowd was palpable. Banners greeted entrance with hawkish precision, and the cheers of fans melded with the murmur of anticipation. The established champions, draped in awards and pride, slept soundly in their assumed superiority. They had not yet taken notice of the quiet step of the woman who had walked in wearing a flannel suit, a suit that spoke of authenticity and unpretentious grit rather than the glimmer of new technology. In that moment, as she moved silently toward the shooting line, it became clear that the day would not follow the usual script. Her silhouette, modest yet resolute, suggested that the measure of a champion could not always be deciphered from pockets lined with expensive gear or from the glare of bright sponsorship logos. In the midst of all the polished appearances and hushed superiority, the unlikeliest contender was about to take her rightful place in a contest that, until now, had been dominated by the cream of the crop. The stage was set. The audience, previously ensnared by predictable routines and familiar symbols of excellence, now found itself on the brink of witnessing an unexpected phenomenon. All eyes would be fixed on her, whether to laugh or to learn from the sheer force of her presence. Yet none could deny that her entrance challenged everything they presumed about who truly belonged among champions. The echoes of early morning chatter were disturbed by a low murmur of amusement as the woman in the worn flannel suit made her way toward the shooting range. In stark contrast to the meticulous uniforms and gleaming high-end gear of the established champions, her presence seemed almost absurd, a relic from a bygone era, misplaced amid state-of-the-art weaponry and modern bravado. As she walked, her plain, sturdy boots hit the concrete with a measured cadence that went unnoticed by many busy pre-competition conversations. Instead, whispers and snickers rippled through the crowd. Inside the spacious clubhouse adjacent to the range, heated discussions buzzed about the day's lineup. Experienced competitors, clad in custom-fitted shooting jackets, leaned casually against polished timber walls, inspecting their precision rifles with the air of connoisseurs discussing fine art. Amid these conversations, eyes kept drifting toward the newcomer, a woman who appeared to be more an observer than a serious contender. "Look at her," one competitor sneered in a low, dismissive tone, loud enough for nearby shooters to catch the comment. "She's not even here to compete, probably just tagging along as a guest or a spectator." Another chuckled. "Yeah, who comes to a national championship dressed in a flannel suit? This isn't a charity thrift shop." Their laughter was a chorus of disdain, echoing off the walls of the clubhouse and leaving little room for any sense of empathy. Some of the local regulars shared knowing glances, their expressions a mixture of amusement and condescension, convinced that they were witnessing nothing more than a fleeting comedy of errors. Yet, as the ridicule spread, the woman walked silently towards the lineup, her eyes fixed forward with an unwavering calm that belied the mockery around her. Every step was composed, as if each one was a quiet rebuke to the snide remarks that followed her. She moved to the shooting lane with a pragmatism that was almost clinical. No flashy accessories adorned her outfit, only a simple, functional rifle, weathered perhaps by years of use but well maintained in its own right. In her hands, that plain instrument appeared less a hunting tool for glory than a trusted extension of her own steady resolve. At the loading bay, while other competitors engaged in idle banter and exchanged barbs about her supposed inexperience, she began preparing her equipment with deliberate precision, the click of spent cartridges being neatly arranged, the gentle adjustment of her sights, and the measured way she checked the safety of her firearm were acts that, though unaccompanied by any flamboyant gesture, spoke volumes about her discipline. Every movement was a testament to countless hours of practice in solitude, a ritual honed over time, far removed from the ostentation that characterized the modern-day champions. "Probably she just came to watch the show," one of the younger shooters muttered, leaning over to a friend as they reloaded their high-tech rifles. "Maybe she's even a relative of one of the organizers. You know, here for a laugh rather than to win something real." His tone dripped with incredulity and cheap amusement, fully expecting her to vanish before her first shot was even taken. The unspoken consensus in the room was that she was an imposter, a curiosity best ignored. In stark contrast to the dismissive chatter surrounding her, the woman's demeanor grew even more resolute. as she approached the firing line, while others scoffed and exchanged half-smirks. She appeared to be oblivious to their insinuations. Her eyes were cool and measured, her jaw set with quiet determination. There was no trace of anxiety. Instead, there was a focused intensity, as if she were in a private conversation with her long-practiced instincts. Every layman's look of amusement had no effect on her demeanor. She was not here to gain approval through elaborate gear or pronounced bravado. She was here because she believed in her skill, honed far beyond the superficial trappings of the competition. Standing at her designated shooting station, she slowly assembled her rifle with practiced ease. The room, once filled with derisive laughter and dismissive whispers, fell into a subdued quiet as her concentration deepened. The competitors, who moments ago had been eager to cast their mockery on her, now exchanged bemused glances as they noted her composed focus. Some found themselves leaning in just a little closer, uncertain whether this unassuming figure might surprise them if her reputation was destined to be written not in polished words, but in the raw evidence of perfect execution. For every sneer that had echoed moments before, there now emerged a growing sense of anticipation. The tensions that had once been laced with contempt began to teeter on the cusp of uncertainty, as the unyielding quiet that enveloped her suggested that she had nothing left to prove through idle chatter. Even those who had dismissed her outright now watched, their curiosity slowly replacing the earlier mirth. The stage was set for her first shot, a moment that promised to silence even the harshest critics and redefine what it meant to be a true competitor on this storied range. In the midst of accusatory whispers and lingering snickers, the atmosphere at the range bristled with anticipatory tension. Every eye had been trained on the uniformed champions, whose expensive equipment and meticulously polished rifles had long been the standard for excellence. Now, as the unassuming woman in the faded flannel suit stepped up to the firing line, an almost palpable hush fell over the crowd. It was as though time itself hesitated in its relentless progression. Every second stretched into an eternity as all those who had jeered and scoffed prepared, perhaps subconsciously, for the moment when she would prove that first impressions can be fatally misleading. She moved with a quiet intensity that belied the casual ridicule she had endured. Reaching the shooting station, she methodically placed her simple, well-worn rifle on the support rest, with the grace of someone who had long practiced under far less glamorous conditions. Every movement was deliberate, a subtle adjustment of the sights, a measured change in her grip, and a soft, almost imperceptible exhale that steadied her focus. In that moment, with the surrounding laughter reducing into a strained silence, only one sound could be perceived. The measured rhythm of her heartbeat synced with the gentle trickle of wind across the range. For those who had never given her a second thought, it was hard to reconcile the inconspicuous nature of her appearance with the latent intensity evident in her eyes. The crowd, comprised of hardened champions and seasoned spectators, had expected a performance that would be forgettable at best. Instead, what they witnessed was a transformation of the mundane into something spectacular. With calm precision, she raised her rifle to the designated mark, aligning it with a target that until that hour had symbolized the pinnacle of shooting prowess, a record that had stood unchallenged for years. In a singular moment that crushed all derision, she squeezed the trigger. There was no cacophonous roar or extravagant flourish, only a clean, almost whisper-quiet click that echoed powerfully against the silence that enveloped the range. The bullet, propelled by years of hidden practice and the quiet resilience of someone determined to defy expectations, soared gracefully through the air. For a fleeting second, it seemed to traverse an endless void, immaculate in its trajectory. Then, with the inevitability of a force of nature, it struck the target with a definitive, resounding impact. The sound of the hit was more than just an acoustic event. It was a declaration. The shrill crack of the impact, followed by an almost tangible ripple of silence, spread through the onlookers like a shockwave. In that suspended moment, the shattered record was not simply a numerical statistic. It was a challenge to every preconceived notion that had been festering among the elite competitors. The previously bustling chatter of the audience stilled into a profound silence that was heavier than the loudest cheer. It was as if every person in the crowd was collectively holding their breath and witnessing a miracle in real time. For the first time, the dismissive glances and mocking expressions were replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. The champions, who had once laughed off her appearance and underestimated her skill, now exchanged puzzled, even sheepish glances. They could not fathom how someone who had entered the arena with what they perceived as archaic attire and an unimpressive setup could deliver a shot of such transcendent caliber. This single shot, executed with the unwavering calm of a veteran, yet born out of a spirit that had been marginalized for far too long, had not only obliterated a long-held record, it had shattered the walls of prejudice and arrogance that had earlier prevented them from truly seeing her talent. The target, once an innocuous board marked with scores and chemical burn marks from rifle shots, now bore a fresh mark of brilliance. The center of the bullseye, split perfectly by the bullet, glowed as a testament to her mastery. Every spectator in the stands, from the youngest enthusiast to the most hardened competitor, was drawn into a stunned awe. Conversations that had begun with derision and dismissiveness melted into murmurs of incredulity. Even the most seasoned judges of the sport, whose voices had once commanded authority as they honed in on minute details during previous matches, now found themselves reduced to silence as the implications of her shot sank in. Her face remained impassive and resolute as she lowered her rifle, her brow casually unfurrowed. For her, this shot was not a moment of ego or showmanship. It was the natural culmination of countless solitary hours of training in obscurity, the reward for perseverance that had not been dampened by laughter or ridicule. It was, in every sense, a work of art, the product of a soul that had long been underestimated, finally given the chance to paint its true colors upon the canvas of the challenge before her. In that moment, the transformation was complete. The mark of derision that had been cast upon her was obliterated by the undeniable evidence of raw talent. The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to both honor and capture the essence of her victory. Not a single person could claim that her performance had been a lucky fluke. It was clear that what they had witnessed was the manifestation of exceptional skill, honed through passion, perseverance, and a relentless refusal to accept the limitations imposed by mere appearances. As the echo of her shot faded, whispers of admiration began to ripple through the crowd. The champions, now forced to acknowledge that true skill could come from the humblest of origins, started to murmur words of respect and astonishment. The judges scrambled to verify the record that had stood unchallenged for years, and soon it was confirmed. She had not only met the long-standing standard, she had surpassed it by a margin that left everyone breathless. In that instant, the narrative of the competition was irrevocably altered. The once dismissed outsider was now etched into the annals of the sport as a force to be reckoned with, her talent shining brighter than any label or expensive accessory could ever signify. No sooner had the deafening silence fallen over the shooting range than the once snooty champions began to stir with a palpable mix of disbelief and reluctant admiration. In the moments immediately following her record-breaking shot, the hardened veterans, men and women who had prided themselves on decades of refined technique and meticulously honed equipment, found their carefully constructed notions of superiority unceremoniously upended. Their eyes, once narrowed in disdain as they observed the woman in the worn flannel suit, now flickered with confusion, shock, and even envy. At first, a few of the seasoned competitors exchanged uncertain glances. One veteran, whose name was often mentioned among local circles as Ace for his near-mythical precision, was the first to break the stunned silence. Leaning over to a fellow champion, he murmured, almost inaudibly, "Did you just see that? I don't believe it." His usually unshakable composure was visibly disturbed. The impeccable record, one that had withstood years of challenges and was spoken of in hushed reverence, now lay in ruins, shattered by a single unadorned shot from someone they had assumed to be merely a curious onlooker. Slowly, curiosity replaced scorn. One by one, the champions began to approach, no longer with the condescension of mockery, but with a tentative respect tinged with incredulity, a tall, sharply dressed competitor from a neighboring region who had once scoffed at her appearance and whispered dismissively about her lack of proper gear, hesitated before speaking up. "Miss, excuse me," he said cautiously, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness that was entirely uncharacteristic for a man accustomed to dictating the terms of every contest. "Could you share with us your stance, your technique?" His question, though polite, was laced with genuine wonder. It was as if the champion's formidable facade was crumbling in the face of undeniable raw talent. The woman, whose expression had never wavered through the first shot, met his gaze evenly. Her eyes, once overlooked behind the veil of a simple flannel suit, now shone with quiet pride and an unspoken invitation to question the very foundations of conventional wisdom. "I've practiced on my own, every day," she said, her tone steady and calm, with nothing more than my determination and the willingness to learn. Her response sent another ripple of murmurs through the gathering. Others, emboldened by the sincerity of her declaration, began to crowd around her station, forming a semicircle of champions whose previous derision had given way to a thirst for understanding. Within minutes, the atmosphere transformed completely. The air, once heavy with the taunts and dismissive laughter of moments before, now resonated with measured, respectful inquiry. Several champions leaned closer to observe her weapon, noticeably modest yet impeccably maintained, and the positioning of her fingers on the trigger. One of them, a middle-aged shooter known for his nearly flawless records in international competitions, asked, "Your grip, your breathing. It appears almost instinctual. How long have you trained with this rifle?" His voice was not mocking, but rather full of keen interest as he attempted to glean the secret behind such perfection. The woman answered in a quiet, matter-of-fact manner that rippled through the ranks of onlookers. "I've been shooting since I was young, long before many of you had even picked up a rifle. I practiced in fields, on abandoned ranges, and in my own backyard. I may not have the latest gadgets, but I have something far more reliable, a clear mind and unwavering focus." The sincerity of her words, coupled with the undeniable evidence of her record-breaking shot, began to chip away at the once impenetrable wall of elitism. Even the judges, who had been silently tallying scores and setting their expectations according to established records, exchanged looks of stunned contemplation. It was in that charged atmosphere that a ripple of self-reflection spread among the established champions. Whispers began, not of scorn but of introspection. "We've underestimated her," one voice admitted quietly. "There's something to her technique," another concurred, his tone sincere and tinged with professional awe. For many of them, whose identities had long been entwined with expensive gear and polished routines, the realization was both humbling and transformative. It forced them to confront the hard truth that excellence can emerge in the most unassuming of packages, without the bells and whistles that are often mistaken for the sole markers of professional success. Some competitors, who had been on the receiving end of their own share of high-pressure competitions and blistering critiques, found that her unexpected performance prompted an internal reassessment of what truly constituted talent in their sport. They remembered their own beginnings, times when their raw potential shone brighter than any brand-new accessory. Now confronted by an outsider who had shattered the record with a single flawless shot, they began to see that true marksmanship was less about outward appearances and expensive equipment, and more about the disciplined execution of technique and the intangible determination to succeed. In conversations that followed, a notable shift occurred. Groups that had once debated the merits of high-end optics and the latest state-of-the-art rifles now turned their attention to her form, her breathing, and the simplicity of her method. One young champion, visibly moved by the revelation that talent need not wear a polished uniform, remarked, "I used to think that success was all about gear and sponsors. But looking at her, I see that the heart of the sport lies in the quiet moments of focus and genuine dedication. It's humbling." And so, as applause and murmurs of admiration began to replace the earlier sneers, the champion's hardened facades softened into expressions of reluctant wonder. The once defiant silence of the audience now swelled into a quiet, respectful buzz as a transformation occurred not only in the score sheets, but in the very fabric of the competition's culture. No longer could one dismiss an opponent based on appearance alone. The champion in the worn flannel suit had forced every skeptical mind to reckon with the possibility that she was not an imposter or a fluke, but rather a competitor whose innate desire to achieve excellence had been concealed beneath conventional expectations. In that pivotal moment, the champions, once so quick to judge and even quicker to mock, became students of humility, recognizing that the art of shooting lay in the silent conversations between a mark and its maker, not in the glitz of modern accessories or the weight of reputation. Her record-breaking shot had redefined the boundaries of what was possible, and her unpretentious manner had demonstrated that true skill was forged in the crucible of perseverance and passion, rather than bought by affluence or manufactured image. As the initial shock of that single record-breaking shot began to settle over the range, the atmosphere underwent a dramatic metamorphosis. The sneers and dismissive glances that had so recently filled the air slowly dissolved, replaced by a growing current of respect and awe. The once mocking silence transformed into an attentive focus, an unspoken recognition that something extraordinary was unfolding right before their eyes. While many in the crowd had earlier been content to ridicule the ways of an underdog, the undeniable brilliance of her shot had surged through the ranks like wildfire, imperceptibly altering hearts and minds. Without pausing to soak in their newfound admiration, the woman in the time-worn flannel suit returned to her station. With an effortless grace that belied years of quiet dedication, she began to line up her stance for her next series of shots. The champion shooters, who had earlier exchanged derisive whispers about her unprofessional attire and questionable equipment, now found themselves leaning forward, their previous arrogance replaced by a respectful curiosity. They observed her every move with rapt attention, the clear, measured intake of breath before taking aim, the decisive yet refined gesture as she steadied her modest rifle, and the unwavering concentration that shone through her every glance. The shots that followed were nothing less than sublime. One after the other, she released rounds into the target with such consistent precision that the marks on the bullseye spoke louder than words could. Each bullet left a perfect, unmistakable mark on the target, demonstrating not only her latent talent, but also an elegance and poise that had been honed in the crucible of countless solitary training sessions. In that moment, her performance was not a thunderous display of bravado, but a quiet, unstoppable force, a series of flawless expressions of skill that toppled every preconceived notion held by the crowd. Spectators, formerly complicit in casting dismissive glances, could now be seen exchanging glances of wonder. Some even began to murmur words of encouragement, their earlier mockery replaced by a dawning realization that genuine skill is often hidden beneath layers of simple appearance. "Look at her technique," one of the younger marksmen could be heard saying, his voice tinged with admiration. "There is real discipline there, pure precision, no matter how unpretentious her gear." Others, once so confident in their own superiority, now found themselves forced to reassess what it truly meant to be a champion of the sport. In that evolving moment of revelation, the woman continued her steady barrage of perfect shots. With every pull of the trigger, her presence grew even larger, transcending the confines of mere participation. She did not seek to shout or command attention. Her focus was simple and unyielding. Instead, her actions spoke vividly, a series of underplayed yet flawless executions that shattered the long-standing record, shot after shot. Each successive round further cemented her unassailable claim to a place among the elite. Even the judges, whose score sheets and detailed notes had previously settled many disputes, could no longer hide their astonishment. They crossed their eyes over their score displays repeatedly, recalculating the numbers that now reflected a performance that was head and shoulders above much of what they had witnessed in the past. As the final round of her performance approached, a collective silence fell, or perhaps more aptly, a hush laden with anticipation and respect. The once scornful banter among the competitors had given way to a profound sense of communal recognition. The veteran shooters, whose lives had been built on the meticulous refinement of skill and technology, now stood humbled, realizing that appearance and expensive equipment could never substitute the substance of true marksmanship. For a brief, transcendent moment, all the skepticism in the field was swept away by the undeniable purity of talent displayed before them. After her final, flawless shot of the day, the hearing in the grandstand was almost palpable. A silence waited with respect and the sudden awareness of witnessing history in the making. The marks on the target stood as the ultimate testament to her prowess. No longer was she merely an outsider. The champions who had laughed at her arrival now approached her with congratulatory claps on the shoulder and genuine measured inquiry about her training methods. Her eyes, once dismissed as inconsequential behind faded fabric, now radiated the quiet satisfaction of a person who had turned deep personal practice into world-altering performance. One by one, the established competitors came forward, asking with newfound respect, "How did you do that, and what is your secret?" Her measured, steady voice, free of boast or show, answered softly, "It isn't about the gear, it's about discipline, practice, and an unyielding will to succeed despite every expectation that you're not cut out for it." In that exchange, the very definition of a champion was rewritten. A champion is not determined by expensive accessories or by the applause of the privileged few, but by the inner strength that transforms doubt into achievement. In the end, as the competition drew to a close, the transformation was complete. The once dismissive crowd, which had entered the arena preoccupied by titles and flashy equipment, now understood that genuine skill may very well find its home in the most unexpected of places. She had not only shattered a long-held record, but had also broken down the barriers of prejudice and elitism that had cloaked this arena for far too long. Her performance had become a lesson for every competitor and spectator alike, a lesson that true mastery is forged in the fires of perseverance and personal commitment, not in outward appearances or expensive labels. In the wake of her astonishing performance that shattered records and silenced every sneer, the tide of opinion at the shooting range began to turn in a way that none could have foreseen. The atmosphere, once heavy with ridicule and dismissal, was now charged with a palpable sense of awe and anticipation. As the competition rounded into its final stages, the judges conferred in hushed deliberation, their eyes frequently darting back to the unassuming woman who had so effortlessly upended the established order. It wasn't long before the official scoreboards were updated with figures that could not be disputed. Her results were not only historically unprecedented, but also demonstrably superior to those of the long-reigning champions. At the closing ceremony, the entire arena was arranged in a semicircle, facing a grand podium, where esteemed dignitaries and representatives of the Shooting Federation were present. The announcer's voice, rich and sonorous, called for silence as the final results were read aloud. With each carefully measured word, the score of the outsider was revealed. The crowd, now transformed from habitual scoffers into rapt spectators, collectively held its breath. When the name of the remarkable competitor was finally proclaimed as the winner of the day, a moment of stunned silence ensued, a silence that spoke louder than any cheer ever could. Her victory was not just measured in numerical records. It was a triumph over every preconception the community had once embraced. As the announcer detailed her statistics, an unprecedented string of flawless shots that not only smashed the decades-old record, but also set a new benchmark for future competitions. The skeptics were forced to grapple with the undeniable evidence of her talent. The official scores, now emblazoned on large digital displays, radiated brilliance. They stood as a testament to a level of skill and determination that had been honed away from the spotlight of commercial sponsorships and high-end equipment. With the results confirmed and the record officially overturned, the event transitioned into a formal award ceremony. Under the soft glow of stage lights, the leading figures of the shooting community took to the podium to present the winner with a trophy and a specially minted Medal of Excellence. As her name was called once more, she stepped forward with graceful determination. The medal was presented against a backdrop of appreciative applause, a sound so earnest and full of respect that even the long-time critics in the crowd could not help but be moved. For the first time, the once condescending onlookers were forced to reframe their perceptions, as the very individuals they had ridiculed now looked upon her with genuine admiration. While the medal itself was a material symbol of victory, what resonated most profoundly with her was the transformation in the attitude of the people around her. In previous rounds, many had scoffed at her modest attire and simple equipment. Now, as she stood radiantly in the spotlight, they could see that the raw essence of a champion was not determined by external embellishments, but by the clarity of purpose and unwavering dedication within. The congratulatory handshakes and warm embraces from former rivals marked a poignant pivot from envy and scorn to respect and kinship. A veteran shooter who had once jeered at her approach came forward to say, "I was wrong to doubt you today. Your focus and skill reminded me that true talent cannot be bought or branded. It is earned through every painstaking hour of practice." His words, spoken with heartfelt sincerity, reverberated with the collective realization that the spirit of the sport was far richer and more inclusive than they had ever believed. In quiet moments after the formal proceedings, as the crowd dissipated and echoes of the day's historic event lingered, interviews with media and informal conversations among competitors emerged that further celebrated the transformation. Reporters asked her candidly about the secret behind her flawless technique and unyielding resolve. With a composed and thoughtful tone, she replied, "I have always believed that it is not about the gear you wear or the accessories you carry. It's about the discipline of your practice, the strength of your commitment, and the courage to trust your own abilities, even when no one else does." Her words struck a chord, serving as a reminder that greatness often arises quietly, from within rather than from a flashy exterior. The victory also rippled outwards beyond the confines of the competition. In a town where shooting contests were the highlight of the social calendar, her performance sparked discussions at local diners, community halls, and even family living rooms. People who had once dismissed her presence now debated the deeper lessons embedded in her achievement. It wasn't simply a sports result, it was a redefinition of what constitutes excellence. Her record had been more than a statistic. It had become a beacon for untapped potential, a call to challenge long-held biases, and an inspiration to anyone who had ever felt underestimated. As the day came to a close, she returned to the firing line one last time, a symbolic gesture of humility and persistence. Standing under the vast evening sky, surrounded by muted applause and respectful nods, she took a solitary moment to reflect on her journey. The medal resting against her chest was a tangible acknowledgement of victory, but the true prize she carried was the realization that dignity and perseverance can triumph over prejudice. The taste of victory was bittersweet, a blend of past scorn and newfound affirmation. Yet it was unmistakably sweet for the outsider who had reshaped the very idea of what it meant to be a champion. In the hushed moments that followed the award ceremony, as the evening light softened the edges of the grandstand and the crowd slowly began to disperse, a profound change settled over the entire arena. The once arrogant whispers and sneers of derision were now replaced by earnest conversation and thoughtful introspection. Every competitor, judge, and spectator present was left with a singular, transformative revelation that greatness doesn't always wear a designer uniform or carry expensive accessories. It often arrives discreetly, cloaked in simplicity and steeled by relentless perseverance. The woman in the old flannel suit, whose performance had so abruptly upended the established order, now stood apart from the throng as her quiet victory began to ripple through each heart in the hall. Rather than basking in boastful praise or a whirlwind of self-promotion, she accepted congratulations with the same understated grace that had characterized her journey from the moment she stepped into the arena. Her eyes, still kind but luminous with unspoken resolve, met those around her, not as a defiant challenge to preconceptions, but as a gentle affirmation of her inner strength and painstaking dedication. As informal conversations took shape among the once dismissive champions, a new culture of respect began to permeate their ranks. Veterans, renowned for their technical prowess and once so certain of their unassailable records, admitted quietly among themselves, We've been blinded by appearances for far too long. In hushed tones and sincere admissions, they recalled their own humble beginnings, days when raw potential and self-belief meant everything, long before they had come to rely on high-end equipment or flashy sponsorship deals. Each shared memory was a reminder that the true measure of marksmanship was not about the latest technology, but about the disciplined interplay of skill, timing, and heart. Meanwhile, back in the arena, the sound of the public's slow, shifting applause was a living testament to what had truly occurred that day. In the aftermath of her performance, even the previously obstinate officials began to question the very benchmarks of competition. Panels were later convened to review the nuanced art of shooting with fresh eyes, and many decided that the essence of marksmanship was as much about mental fortitude and an unyielding spirit as it was about carefully calibrated machines. Local sports clubs and training centers buzzed with renewed excitement over the possibility that greatness might arise from the most unexpected quarters. Stories of the underdog's determination, of long nights of solitary practice driven solely by an inner fire, became the new law of the sport. In quiet moments after the grand ceremony, the woman took a moment to wander away from the spotlight, a silent act of humility that spoke volumes about her character. Standing at the edge of the firing line beneath a fading sunset, she recalled the long hours spent at abandoned ranges and the countless mornings when she had practiced alone, when no one had believed she belonged among champions. That deep-seated conviction that the worth of a competitor was determined by their inner potential rather than by the outward trappings of success had carried her through every moment of adversity. And now, as the realization of her achievement began to settle across the once disdainful crowd, the lesson became clear. A true champion is defined not by what the world expects of them, but by what they believe they can achieve when they stay true to themselves. The transformation that day rippled well beyond the confines of the shooting range. In the days that followed, interviews with local media turned into thoughtful discussions about the true nature of talent and success. Coaches and former champions alike began to speak of a renewed philosophy, one where integrity, persistence, and inner strength would be celebrated over outward appearance and expensive accessories. It was a paradigm shift that challenged long-established hierarchies and assumptions, reshaping not only the future of the sport, but also inspiring countless individuals who had for so long been sidelined by judgment based solely on appearance. In a final public address, as the entire community gathered one cool evening for an impromptu celebration of the day's unforgettable events, one of the older champions, his voice marked by a mix of regret and newfound reverence, summarized the lesson perfectly. We always believed champions were chosen by birthright, by the flash of their gear or the prestige of their sponsors. Today we learned otherwise. True excellence is cultivated in the quiet forge of dedication and self-belief. It is not the gleam of expensive brands, but the resolve inside that carries you forward when no one else believes in you. That resounding message echoed long after the event, firmly etching itself into the hearts and minds of everyone present. The simple wisdom that had been revealed that day was a beacon for all who had ever been underestimated, a reminder that an authentic champion is born not of external finery, but of the inner fire that perseveres regardless of how the world may initially judge you. Not always does appearance determine the champion of tomorrow. Sometimes all it takes is the unwavering belief in oneself. Subscribe if you believe that true greatness is measured by inner strength and determination rather than by glittering exteriors. And share in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment when you defied expectations and proved your true potential against all odds?